Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're diving into a mystery that's just, well, it's evolutionary, anthropological, and honestly, deeply personal. I want you to picture an ancient human. Actually, let's just imagine him as that classic, simple stick figure we've all been drawing since kindergarten. Got it? Now ask yourself, what was his home life actually like? Did ancient humans have just one partner? It sounds like a simple question, right? But as you'll see, the second you start pulling on that thread, the whole shebang gets incredibly complicated. So let's dive into this.
To answer this, we really can't just look in one place. We've got to look through a whole bunch of scientific lenses. We need to examine our biology, dig into the archaeological record, study primatology, and sift through cross-cultural anthropology. Basically, we're going to build a comprehensive picture of human mating from the ground up, using literally every clue our ancestors left behind for us. And I'm going to give you a tiny spoiler right out of the gate. When you look at all the data, the truth about human mating isn't this simple black and white binary of strict monogamy on one side or totally unconstrained promiscuity on the other. It's actually this fascinating, messy middle. The short answer is kind of mostly, sort of, with a lot of variation, which honestly is why science is so much fun. The reality is always way more nuanced than a simple story. Section 1. Clues in our biology. The physical fossil record. So, physical size actually reveals a ton about mating behavior. In highly polygynous species, where one male literally fights for exclusive access to multiple females, like gorillas, the male is roughly twice the size of the female. That intense male-to-male competition creates massive evolutionary pressure to just get huge. But in strictly monogamous species, male and female body sizes are practically identical, right, at 100%, because fighting ability doesn't really dictate your chances of pairing off. So where does our human stick figure fall? Right at about 115 to 120%, a moderate degree of sexual dimorphism. It's definitely more than you'd expect from strict monogamy, but way less than a harem-building gorilla. Our bones and muscles are pointing straight toward a mating system somewhere right in the middle.
And this is backed up by a slightly more, well, delicate biological clue: testicle size. Evolutionary biologists use this to measure sperm competition. Over on the left, we've got chimpanzees. They are highly promiscuous. Females mate with multiple males in really rapid succession, so chimps have enormous testes to compete at the cellular level. On the right, gorillas. The dominant male has exclusive access, zero sperm competition, which results in remarkably small testes compared to their massive bodies. And as humans, we fall squarely in the middle yet again. Larger than gorillas, which tells us some competition definitely happened in our past, but smaller than chimps, meaning we weren't wildly promiscuous either. The anatomy is a crystal clear fossil record. We evolved for a mixed intermediate system.
Section 2. The cultural record. Reviewing the police reports. Get this, out of hundreds of human cultures studied, roughly 80 to 85% permit a man to have more than one wife at the same time. Meanwhile, only 15 to 20% have strict monogamy as a cultural norm. Now, a lot of people hear that and immediately jump to the conclusion that having multiple partners must be the natural human default. But hold on, because without context, that statistic is actually actively misleading. Because here is the real catch. Having formal permission to do something absolutely does not equal actual practice. In most of those societies that permitted polygyny, the vast majority of pairings were still monogamous. Why? Well, because supporting multiple partners takes an immense amount of resources. Think about our deep evolutionary history as egalitarian hunter-gatherers. That is the environment that really shaped our psychology, and in that world, resource sharing was mandatory. You just couldn't hoard the wealth needed to support multiple wives. So even if the rules technically allowed it, the daily lived reality for the majority of our ancestors was flexible monogamy. Section 3. Why monogamy was invented, the social solution. Researcher Joseph Henrich proposes this absolutely fascinating theory. Strict monogamy wasn't biologically inevitable. It was actually an invented social technology. Picture a society as a big animated group of our stick figures. If a few high-status guys hoard all the partners, you're left with a massive group of unpartnered men. And historically speaking, unpartnered men with nothing to lose tend to engage in some pretty risky, violent, and socially disruptive behavior. By inventing and culturally enforcing monogamy, societies naturally reduced male-on-male violence, dramatically cranked up societal stability, and boosted paternal investment in kids, simply because men were confident those kids were theirs. Monogamy was essentially a social tool, invented to solve some seriously dangerous coordination problems and make whole civilizations way more competitive.
Section 4. Evidence in our DNA. Forensic genetics.
Now, this number is just staggering, 16 to 19 million. That is the estimated number of male line descendants alive today from just one single man who lived in the Eurasian steppe roughly 4,000 years ago. That massive genetic footprint is the ultimate proof of extreme reproductive inequality. Some men in the Bronze Age were having dozens of children across multiple women, while plenty of other men had absolutely none. Our genes remember this inequality, even when the history books don't. The driving force behind this extreme inequality? Agriculture. Once humans figured out how to farm, they could own land, they could own cattle. Wealth suddenly became something you could inherit. That material surplus allowed a select few men to heavily expand their polygyny, which naturally drove up genetic inequality. Contrast that with our hunter-gatherer ancestors. Their very survival relied on strict, egalitarian sharing norms. That sharing acted like a structural constraint, basically preventing anyone from hoarding enough resources to dominate reproductive access.
Section 5. The psychology of jealousy. Psychoanalyzing the ancestors. You don't evolve a psychological response to a threat that never actually existed. Jealousy is a cross-cultural universal, which proves that the threat of losing a partner was a very consistent issue in our ancestral past. But the triggers are actually different. Studies consistently show that men report much more intense jealousy in response to sexual infidelity, which makes total sense as an evolutionary threat of accidentally investing resources into offspring that aren't theirs. Women, on the other hand, report more intense jealousy over emotional infidelity, the very real threat that a partner might redirect his crucial resources and investment to another woman and her kids. This psychological structure is basically a perfect map of ancestral reproductive costs. And let's be incredibly clear about something right now. Women in early societies were absolutely not passive background characters just waiting around for men to compete over them. Female mate choice was an active, highly sophisticated force that shaped human mating every bit as powerfully as male competition did. Our female ancestors carefully selected partners who had physical capability, for sure, but they also heavily demanded social skill and demonstrated generosity. Think about it. In a small hunter-gatherer band where everybody is watching everybody else around the clock, you simply couldn't fake being a good, generous partner. Women were truly the active architects of human mating. Section 6. The messy human truth. Case closed. So, here is the bedrock truth we arrive at. The primary pair bond is a genuine human universal. It is found in absolutely every single culture ever documented. The neurochemical architecture of attachment, things like oxytocin and vasopressin, is hardwired right into us, simply because pairs that stayed together and shared the load ended up raising more surviving children. Marriage, in some culturally recognized form, exists everywhere. But as we've seen from our anatomy and our DNA, that pair bond wasn't always perfectly exclusive. So evolutionary biologists use the ultimate scientific classification for human mating: facultative monogamy with variation. Now, facultative just means it's adaptable based on the environment. The recognized pair bond is our undeniable baseline, but the system itself is highly flexible. It accommodated extra pair relationships, individual variations, and completely different cultural rules over thousands and thousands of years. It really embraces the reality that exclusivity is something constantly negotiated between our biology, our culture, and our specific circumstances. Which brings us to our final, rather provocative question. Knowing our beautifully complex, messy, evolutionary history, how does facultative monogamy shape our modern expectations of relationships today? The evidence clearly shows human sexual behavior has always been way more variable than any simple story could ever capture. The pair bond is profoundly real, but the specific shape of a partnership is deeply complex. And honestly, anyone who has ever been in a relationship knows, yeah, it's complicated. I really hope this gave you a completely new perspective on human nature. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.